A 17-year-old was fired in 47 seconds for paying $4 to feed a congresswoman. In a city boiling with inequality, where the summer air hangs heavy with silence and simmering tension, that one small act of respect, meant to go unnoticed, ignited something far bigger than he could have imagined. It wasn't about the sandwich. It wasn't even about the money. It was about a line, invisible but enforced, that punished compassion and rewarded compliance. And when the corporate rules crushed that boy's future in less than a minute, the question that echoed louder than any headline was this: when the system punishes good, who dares to stand up for it? What followed wasn't a protest. It wasn't a speech. It was the quiet return of a woman in a blue suit, uninvited, unshaken, and unmistakably on a mission. But to understand why her presence mattered that night, why the ground beneath a single McDonald's would become the first spark of something bigger, we need to go back to a scorching July evening in Dallas, back to a boy named Keon Whitlow, and the shift that would change everything. It was 8:43 p.m. in East Dallas, but the heat hadn't gone anywhere. It pressed against the glass like a ghost, clung to the asphalt, seeped into every breath like the city was exhaling something angry. Outside the McDonald's on Buckner Boulevard, the neon arches flickered just a beat too slow, like even they were tired. Inside, the fryers hissed with oily resentment. The soda machine let out tired gasps, and the floor tiles had turned slick with humidity and spilled Sprite. 17-year-old Keon Whitlow wiped his brow with the back of a gloved hand, knowing full well that the sweat would return before he even reached the next table. His back ached, his feet pulsed, and he was only 3 hours into a 7-hour shift. He hadn't eaten, not since the stale bagel he grabbed that morning on the way to school. But hunger wasn't new. Keon had become skilled at ignoring it. He'd grown up learning how to stretch $5 across 3 meals, how to choose silence over shame, when the lunch line scanned his card and it beeped red. Tonight he was late to work, again. His manager, Mrs. Tran, hadn't said anything yet, but she didn't need to. The look she gave him as he walked in, hair damp from the sprint, told him everything. His mom's car, the old Dodge that coughed more than it drove, had finally given up. So now he walked. Every day, 14 blocks, one way. His legs had gotten used to it, but his pride hadn't. Keon didn't complain. He wasn't that kind of kid. He worked hard, kept his head down, and tried to shrink beneath the fluorescent lights and rules and plastic name tags. This job, grimy, loud, and thankless, wasn't a dream, but it was something. It kept the lights on, helped his mom with groceries, paid for his little brother's shoes last fall. That meant something. Then it happened. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the black SUV roll up, smooth, quiet, clean. No tinted rims, no music thumping. Just government plates and calm intention. Keon didn't need to see the face. He saw the silhouette and knew. The woman who stepped out didn't float like a celebrity. She walked like she had business to finish. Blue pantsuit, white sneakers, no entourage, no cameras. Just Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, standing in line for a McChicken like she wasn't one of the most recognizable women in Texas politics. His heart jumped. What was she doing here? No one came here unless they had to, especially not people like her. He nudged the cashier, whispered under his breath, "That's her. That's Firecracker Crockett, the lady from South Dallas." The cashier shrugged, but Keon's eyes didn't move. He watched her like you'd watch a lightning strike, part awe, part disbelief. She didn't ask for special treatment, didn't cut the line. When it was her turn, she ordered like anyone else. Just a McChicken and a small sweet tea. Simple, efficient, familiar. She smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't for show, but made you want to smile back. And in that moment, on a tired body and an empty stomach, Keon made a decision. A small one, a quiet one, the kind that shouldn't matter. He stepped forward and said, "It's on me." Mrs. Tran didn't call him right away. Keon finished his shift like it was any other, mopping near the soda fountain, restocking sauce packets, wiping fingerprints from the glass doors. The dining area was mostly empty now, save for a couple of teenagers with fries and loud laughter. and a woman scrolling through her phone in the corner booth. Keon moved through the motions without thinking, his legs heavier than usual, but his mind oddly light, like he had done something right today, even if no one had noticed. But someone had. Just as he was tying his hoodie around his waist, ready to start the long walk home, the headset crackled to life. Keon, office. The voice was flat, final. He stepped in, closing the door quietly behind him. Mrs. Tran didn't look up right away. She was tapping on her tablet with those quick, controlled motions of someone who was used to cleaning up messes before they made noise. When she finally did raise her eyes, they weren't angry. That would have made more sense. They were cold, corporate, practiced. "You gave away food," she said. Her voice clipped like it had already been rehearsed. Keon blinked. "I paid for it," he said, unsure if this was a misunderstanding. "It was just a McChicken and a tea. $4. I handed the cash over right after." He reached into his apron like he could prove it with crumpled bills, but she didn't look. "You paid after she ordered. You rang it in under her name. That's theft under store policy." Her words didn't make sense at first. They didn't fit the moment. He wasn't trying to steal anything. He wasn't gaming the system. He was trying to show respect, gratitude. "I didn't know it was a problem if I paid," he offered softly, not defiant, just confused. Mrs. Tran tapped again, harder this time. "It's not about the money, it's about process, about appearance. No free food, not to customers, not to family, not to politicians." Her voice held no room for feeling, just structure, just rules. The walls of the small office suddenly felt tighter, closer. Keon thought about the write-up from last week, the tardiness warnings, the looks from her every time he clocked in sweaty from the walk. Maybe this was just the last straw. "You're done here," she said, just like that. No warning, no second chance, no acknowledgement that what he did came from somewhere good. Keon nodded once, slowly. He didn't argue, didn't beg. He just tucked his hands into his hoodie and walked out the back door. The night air still burned against his skin, thick and unforgiving. The drive-thru hummed behind him, voices echoing orders into speakers. He thought about calling his mom, but he didn't want to hear the disappointment, the exhaustion in her voice. So he walked, alone. And what hurt most wasn't losing the job. It was knowing he lost it because he cared, for $4 and a little bit of dignity. Keon didn't know it, but the moment he walked out the back door, someone else was already telling his story. From the corner booth, the woman with the phone had captured the exchange earlier that night. Just a blurry image of a teenager handing something to the cashier, with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett standing nearby, half turned toward the camera, mid-smile. No captions, no context. Just a frozen moment that could have been anything or everything. And as it turns out, that frame was enough. By the time Keon reached the halfway point on his walk home, tired feet dragging against cracked sidewalks, the photo had been posted to Twitter with a single line. "Kid gave rep. Crockett a free meal. Got fired. What kind of nonsense is that?" The post didn't explode right away. It simmered. A few retweets, a couple of laughing emojis. Then someone else shared it with a thread. "This is what happens when policy matters more than people." The comments rolled in slowly at first, like ripples spreading across a still lake. Then faster, more direct. "This reminds me of when my son got written up for covering a customer shortage at Dollar Tree. What are we even doing if kindness gets punished?" People weren't just reacting. They were remembering, sharing, venting. The kind of collective frustration that builds not from outrage alone, but recognition. This wasn't just Keon's story, it was theirs too. By morning, the tweet had been viewed over 100,000 times. His name wasn't mentioned. His face was barely visible, but already people were narrowing it down. One user guessed the location. Another claimed, "I know that kid from Hillcrest High." Someone else posted, "Manager needs to be held accountable. He paid for the food." And while Keon sat on his worn-out couch at home, eyes heavy, phone face down on the floor, the internet moved without him, amplifying, dissecting, choosing sides. His little brother played Xbox nearby. His mom rustled papers in the kitchen, trying to sort out rent. He hadn't told her yet, not because he was hiding something, but because he didn't know how to explain that he lost his job for doing the right thing. And somewhere, miles away, in a committee room in Austin, Jasmine Crockett's phone buzzed. Her staffer leaned in, showed her the tweet. "You see this?" She took the phone, scanned the image. Her lips pressed into a flat line, her eyebrows furrowed, not with confusion, but with something heavier. "Wait," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "They fired that boy?" Her staffer just shrugged. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't have to. The silence said it all. Something was about to happen, something she wasn't going to let slide. The next evening, the golden arches glowed a little harsher against the falling dusk. Inside, things looked normal. Orders buzzed through the headsets, baskets dropped into hot oil, a teenager swept crumbs half-heartedly under a table. But something was off, a kind of charged stillness, like the calm right before a Texas thunderstorm. At 7:08 p.m., a car pulled into the lot. No fanfare, no cameras, just a clean black sedan and a single woman stepping out with slow, deliberate steps. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't come dressed for TV. No blazer, no pearls, just jeans, a t-shirt and white sneakers that whispered across the tile. She didn't look around for applause. She didn't ask for the manager. She walked straight through the front door, stood just inside the entrance, and looked around like she was searching for something hidden in plain sight. One of the employees noticed first. A girl near the shake machine leaned in and whispered, "She's back." Another worker dropped a tray mid-wipe. Even customers began to glance up from their fries. Phones were already coming out of pockets, camera apps launching with the muscle memory of a generation trained to document justice or drama at a moment's notice. Mrs. Tran emerged from the back office, blouse stiff, smile thinner than usual. She approached the counter with a practiced grace, eyes darting toward the quiet cameras now peeking over booth dividers. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, voice strained with forced politeness. "It's, nice to see you again." Crockett didn't return the smile. "I wish I could say the same," she said, her voice even but laced with something sharp beneath it. "Do you have a moment to speak? Somewhere private, if possible." They moved to the side hallway, just a few feet from the main dining area, but in a place where every glance and every phone lens could still reach. Crockett stood firm, arms relaxed at her sides, but her tone suddenly iron. "I didn't ask for free food," she began. "That young man offered it out of respect. He took $4 out of his own pocket and paid for it. And you fired him." Mrs. Tran crossed her arms defensively. "It wasn't personal. It was policy. He rang it under her name. It violates protocol." Crockett tilted her head, eyes steady. "And what's your policy on basic human decency?" For a moment, neither woman moved. No shouting, no theatrics, just tension, thick, real, and unbearably still. The room held its breath. A toddler dropped a fry. No one even looked. Then as Crockett's gaze bore into Mrs. Tran's, she added with quiet finality, "I'd like his contact information. If you won't give it to me, I'll find another way. But I won't let this sit." Mrs. Tran didn't answer right away. The moment stretched, long and uncertain. Then she turned, muttered something under her breath, and disappeared into the back. Crockett stood alone for a second longer. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The eyes watching her had already chosen a side. The video, shaky, low resolution, recorded by a teenager half hidden behind a soda machine, would hit Instagram within the hour. But she hadn't come to go viral. She'd come for something far more powerful: accountability. It was just past 10 a.m. when the knock came. 3 firm taps, no rhythm, no impatience, just enough to sound official. Keon was still in yesterday's hoodie, slouched on the edge of the couch with his phone face down on the floor and headphones in, though no music played. His mom opened the door first, wariness etched into her face before her eyes even met the visitors. Then they widened. Standing on the porch dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, hands at her sides, face calm. "Good morning," she said gently. "I'm here to speak with Keon, if that's all right." The room froze. Keon stood, his knees stiff, his mouth half open but silent. Yeah, that's me. Crockett nodded, stepping closer. Mind if we sit outside? They moved to the small front porch, the air still warm and heavy with mid-morning sun. His mother stayed inside but kept the door cracked, arms folded, eyes vigilant. They sat side by side, 2 feet between them, the wooden steps creaking under every shift. Keon avoided eye contact, chewing the inside of his cheek. I didn't think you'd even remember me, he said quietly. I mean, it wasn't a big thing, just $4. Crockett turned to him, voice low but clear. You think I forget people who show me respect? You pulled money from your own pocket not for attention, not to impress anyone, just to say thank you. That matters more than you know. Keon shrugged, still unsure what to say, still trying to figure out if this was real. She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. This, she said, holding it between them, is a referral. A friend of mine runs a youth employment program over on Martin Luther King Boulevard. They help young folks finish school, build resumes, find stable jobs, real opportunities. There's an opening right now. If you're interested, it's yours. He stared at the paper but didn't take it right away. His fingers twitched, his chest tightened. Why me? He asked, almost whispering. Why are you doing this? Crockett exhaled softly, then looked at him with that same unwavering gaze she gave the manager just the day before. Because kindness shouldn't cost you your future. Because doing the right thing, especially when no one's watching, shouldn't be punished. And because I believe this world needs more people like you in places that matter. His voice caught for a second. I don't even know what to say. She smiled gently. You don't have to say anything. Just don't let this moment be the end of your story. From behind the screen door, his mother's eyes had gone glassy. She stepped out and hugged him tight as Crockett stood, gave him a parting nod, and walked back to her car without another word. No cameras, no reporters. Just purpose and a promise delivered. By the time Jasmine Crockett's car pulled away from Keon Street, the footage from her earlier visit to McDonald's was already making its rounds. Recorded on a teenager's shaky phone, the 30-second video was grainy, muffled by the sound of ice in a plastic cup and the hum of drive-through orders. But none of that mattered. The internet didn't need perfect audio to recognize tension and truth. The clip showed Crockett standing firm, Mrs. Tran tight-lipped, the air between them thick with quiet confrontation. The caption read simply, Crockett showed up. Manager had no words. That was enough. Instagram lit up first, then TikTok. Then a Twitter thread began breaking down the body language in the exchange. Look how she keeps her voice low. That's power. She didn't curse, didn't flinch, just stood there like the system had to answer for itself. The video hit 300,000 views overnight, then 500,000 by the next morning. But Crockett didn't post it, didn't even comment. In fact, when a local reporter from Dallas Now tried to get a quote, she politely declined. It's not about me, she said. It's about what's right. She ignored the calls from national networks too, CNN, MSNBC, even a request from a podcast that branded itself the viral voice of the South. Her team fielded the inquiries with professionalism, but her message remained the same. No interviews, no spotlights, no political gain. One staffer leaked a quote to a local columnist. She says if the world needs to know she showed up, they've already missed the point. That refusal didn't dull the wave, it sharpened it, because the absence of self-promotion only made her actions stand out more. In an era where every gesture comes with a hashtag, Crockett's silence was louder than a soundbite. People began sharing old speeches of hers, clips from committee hearings where she dressed down lobbyists without raising her voice. A comment under one video read, "She doesn't show up to talk, she shows up to move things." Back at home, Keon scrolled through the whirlwind quietly, barely liking a post, barely responding to the texts trickling in from classmates he hadn't spoken to in months. He didn't know what to make of it, but he knew this much. The world was now watching something that wasn't supposed to be a story. And Crockett, who could have turned the whole thing into a campaign ad, had chosen something rarer. She'd chosen conviction over camera angles. And that, more than anything else, told the world exactly what kind of woman she really was. By midweek, the story had outgrown Dallas. What began as a blurry clip from a fast food lobby had evolved into a national debate. On morning shows, radio panels, and Twitter spaces, the conversation had shifted. It was no longer just about Keon. It was about what he represented: policy versus compassion, order versus empathy, compliance versus courage. A moment became a mirror, and what people saw staring back at them wasn't just one boy. It was the invisible weight pressing down on millions like him. News anchors traded sound bites across split screens. One, sitting in a pristine studio in Chicago, declared, "Rules exist for a reason. If every employee acted on instinct, we'd have chaos." His co-anchor countered, "But when rules silence kindness, what kind of order are we preserving?" The clip bounced between stations, each spinning the story with their own lean. Some framed Keon as irresponsible, a kid who crossed a line. Others called him a hero. But the real flood came from people who'd lived the same reality, quietly, painfully, for years. A former barista from Seattle wrote, "I gave a homeless man an old pastry we were supposed to throw away. Got written up the next day." A gas station attendant in Arkansas posted, "I covered 47 cents for a single mom. Manager saw the camera and said I violated protocol. Fired on the spot." A retail worker in Florida went viral for her comment, "This isn't new. The system doesn't mind if you're kind. It just doesn't want to see it." Instagram filled with screenshots of termination notices and employee manuals highlighting the same lines. No unauthorized discounts, no unlogged transactions, no exceptions. But it was the stories between the lines that broke people. A young man filmed himself outside a strip mall, holding a paper sign. "I was Keon too. They just didn't have cameras back then." Each story was short, but their echoes were long and loud. The rules weren't evil, but they were indifferent. And in that indifference, humanity had been slowly squeezed out. For every corporate voice arguing consistency, there were hundreds of workers who knew what it felt like to get punished for a good deed. What made Keon's story different wasn't just Crockett's presence. It was the camera, the context, the timing. He had become the face of something others had buried beneath silence. And now in lunchrooms and break rooms, people were asking each other questions they hadn't dared to before. What if the real problem isn't breaking the rules, but how easily we punish people who bend them for the right reasons? The building wasn't much to look at from the outside. Faded brick, sun-bleached windows, a hand-painted sign that read, "Youth Employment Initiative," flaking around the edges. Tucked between a grocery outlet and a dental clinic with a flickering neon tooth, it could have been mistaken for any other quiet nonprofit trying to hold back the flood of a city that moved too fast. Keon stood outside for a full minute before walking in. He had rehearsed in his head what he'd say, how he'd introduce himself. But the moment he stepped through the door, all of that dissolved. The air inside was cool, smelling faintly of copier paper and lemon cleaner. A woman behind the front desk greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. "You here for intake?" He nodded. "Name?" "Keon Whitlow." She glanced up sharply, then gave a knowing look, the kind that said, "We've heard about you already." She didn't make a scene, just handed him a clipboard. A few minutes later, a man in a brown blazer and loafers that looked older than Keon himself appeared from a hallway. "Mr. Whitlow?" he asked. Keon stood quickly. "Yes, sir." The man grinned. "Call me Talbot. Everyone does. Come on back." Mr. Talbot had a voice like gravel and honey, rough but kind. He didn't rush, didn't make Keon feel like a case file. As they sat in his modest office, he leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "So," he said, "you're the kid who started all this noise." Keon's shoulders stiffened. "I didn't mean to." Talbot chuckled, not mocking, just warm. "Good. The ones who don't mean to usually turn out all right." The first day was simple. Paperwork, orientation, a quick tour. The walls were filled with photos of graduates shaking hands in suits or posing next to framed certificates. Keon kept his eyes down most of the time, unsure where he belonged in all this. But by the end of the week, something had shifted. He'd sat through a resume workshop where a woman named Regina taught them how to list transferable skills, even from jobs that seemed like nothing. Working at McDonald's teaches you timing, stress management, and patience, she said. You just didn't know those had names. He started a mock interview session, nervous at first, stumbling through answers like he was apologizing for being there. But the volunteer smiled and nodded and said, "We'll work on it." And he did. Every day. Just a little. Keon began showing up 15 minutes early. He took notes, asked questions, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to stay invisible. The envelope came folded in half, tucked quietly into a manila folder that Regina handed Keon after a resume review session. "Open this when you get home," she said with a half smile that didn't quite hide her excitement. Of course, Keon opened it the moment he stepped outside, right there on the steps of the employment center. Inside was a single-page letter, an introduction, a recommendation, and a scheduled interview. The letterhead read South Dallas Community Tech Initiative. At the bottom, in clean cursive ink, it was signed J. Crockett. He read it 3 times, heart racing faster each time, as if the words might disappear if he blinked too hard. The next 48 hours were a blur of nerves and second-guessing. Keon didn't own a button-up shirt. Regina lent him one from her son's closet. Still crisp, sleeves a bit too long. He tried practicing answers in the mirror, but kept tripping over his own thoughts. What if they asked about McDonald's? What if they Googled him? What if this whole thing was a mistake? Monday morning came with a sky heavy with clouds and a stomach full of doubt. The office building was bright, modern, with glass doors and clean floors that smelled like printer ink and lemon wipes. The receptionist smiled and offered him water, which he declined, unsure of where to put his hands or how long to hold eye contact. Then the hiring manager appeared. Marvin, mid-40s, salt and pepper beard, sharp eyes but a calm energy. "Keon, right?" he said warmly. "Come on back." The interview room was sunlit and small. Keon sat stiff in the chair, palms damp. Marvin didn't rush him. He looked over the resume and asked, "So, you like working with people?" Keon hesitated. "I guess. I like being part of a team when it's not toxic." Marvin chuckled, nodded slowly. "You know, that's probably the realest answer I've heard all week." Keon offered an awkward smile, shoulders dropping slightly. The rest of the interview went like that. Honest, clumsy, but never fake. He didn't try to hide where he came from. When Marvin asked why he left his last job, Keon didn't lie. "I paid for someone's food. My manager didn't like that." There was a pause. Then Marvin leaned forward and said, "I think you'd be good here. You listen. You care. That matters." 2 days later, the call came. Keon had the job. Not a favor, not a handout. A real role with responsibilities, a desk, a future. He walked out of the center that afternoon, clutching the offer letter like a lifeline. He didn't call anyone right away. He just sat on the steps, looked up at the sky, and smiled for the first time in what felt like years. Not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time, something had finally opened. Long before she was the woman in the blue suit standing her ground in a fast food restaurant, Jasmine Crockett was just another black girl in a lecture hall, full of doubt and cold stares. Law school didn't welcome her. It tolerated her. From the moment she walked into orientation at the University of Houston, she could feel it. That slow, invisible scanning that happened whenever she raised her hand. The unspoken question hanging in the air like a fog. Does she even belong here? It wasn't always overt. Not at first. It was the way professors seemed surprised when her answers were right. The way classmates conveniently excluded her from study groups, then asked to borrow her notes before finals. One student once told her, half-jokingly, that her seat must have been funded by diversity dollars. She smiled, said nothing, then outscored him on the constitutional law exam by 20 points. But the ache stayed with her, the ache of knowing you had to be twice as good to be considered equal and 5 times better to be respected. She worked late into the night, highlighting cases until her fingers cramped, listening to lectures on repeat. But what kept her going wasn't ambition, it was obligation. To the people who never had a seat at the table, and to one voice that echoed louder than any doubt, her father's. When she called him after a particularly demoralizing mock trial, voice trembling with frustration, he didn't offer pity. He offered fire. "Don't bow, don't break, just blaze," he said. "If they don't open the door, burn a better one." Her first real case came earlier than she expected, an externship in a public defender's office during her final year. The file landed on her desk with barely a glance from the supervising attorney. "It's a throwaway," he said. "Drunk teenager. Plea it out." But Jasmine read it anyway. The teenager wasn't drunk. He was black, walking home from band practice. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin. Arrested for loitering near a gas station he'd just bought candy from. The clerk never even called the police. Someone else did. Someone who saw a tall boy in a hoodie and assumed danger. Jasmine dug in. She interviewed the boy's teacher, the band director, even pulled grainy footage from a nearby ATM camera. Her supervisor rolled his eyes but didn't stop her. 3 weeks later, the charges were dropped. Quietly, no apology. Just a folded court document and an empty sigh. The boy's mother cried. The teenager didn't say much, but as he walked out of the courtroom, he turned to her and said, "No one ever believed me before." Jasmine went home that night and wrote one sentence in her journal, underlined twice. "I fight for the kids no one believes." And from that day forward, everything changed. Not her purpose, but her posture. She would not wait for permission. She would not ask to belong. She would blaze. After law school, Jasmine could have taken the safer route. Corporate law, polished offices, comfortable salaries. She had the grades, the credentials, and just enough polish to pass in places where black women were seen but rarely heard. But she didn't want a corner office in a tower that ignored the world below it. She wanted the streets, the noise, the raw edges of real people facing real consequences. So she planted herself in South Dallas, not because it looked good on a campaign flyer, but because it looked like home. South Dallas didn't ask for pity. It asked for presence, for someone who wouldn't just drive through for photo ops or stand on church steps only during election season. Jasmine showed up in sneakers and her natural curls, stood in courtrooms where names were mispronounced and rights were ignored. She defended teens arrested for skipping school, mothers evicted without notice, day laborers accused of theft because they looked out of place. It wasn't glamorous work. It didn't trend. But it mattered. Her name started spreading, not in headlines but on sidewalks. "That's the lady who got my cousin's case dropped." She told the judge off, without raising her voice. She fights like she knows what it's like to lose. And then came the blue. It started as coincidence. A cobalt suit at a community meeting, a navy blouse at a rally. But soon it became signature, intentional. She wore blue not for branding, but for battle. "Blue is calm," she once said, "but it's also storm." She became the woman people whispered about when injustices flared. "Call that firecracker in the blue suit." The nickname stuck, not because she sought attention, but because she refused to flinch. When she decided to run for office, some advisors warned her, "You're too blunt, too bold. You'll scare donors." But she wasn't running for donors. She was running for the single dad who lost custody because he missed a hearing he was never told about. For the grandmother raising 3 kids on food stamps while city council debated bike lanes in neighborhoods that didn't have sidewalks. She ran to bring the courtroom urgency into the legislative chamber. And she didn't soften. On the campaign trail, when asked if she'd play nice, she smiled and said, "If nice means quiet, count me out." Voters didn't just listen. They rallied. Her signs didn't say "for everyone." They said "for the overlooked." And when she won, against odds, against money, against tradition, South Dallas didn't celebrate a politician. They celebrated one of their own. The woman in blue who didn't blink, didn't bow, didn't break. When the media came knocking, armed with cameras, microphones, and breathless questions, Jasmine Crockett didn't push them away. But she didn't play into their game either. She knew how these things went. One viral clip, one soundbite, then the floodlights fade and nothing actually changes. So while the public fixated on the moment she stood eye to eye with the McDonald's manager, Crockett was already focused on something else entirely. What would come after the noise? Journalists loved her style. The cobalt suits, the fierce calm, the elegant sting in her voice when she corrected someone with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Op-eds called her a modern-day moral compass in heels. Cable panels debated whether she was the next rising star or just a well-timed icon. But Jasmine didn't care to be either. She wasn't interested in being memorable. She was interested in being effective. Behind the scenes, she began asking hard questions, not on Twitter, but in committee rooms where cameras didn't linger. How many youth workers are fired over technicalities? How many kids are written off because of policies designed without context? How much dignity gets lost in fast food jobs that pretend to be stepping stones but function like traps? Keon's story wasn't the first, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But it had momentum, attention, a window. So she used it, not to grandstand, but to draft. Her team began working quietly with labor organizers, youth advocates, and even former HR managers willing to speak off the record. They pulled data on disciplinary policies across low-wage industries. They identified patterns, alarmingly consistent ones. Zero-tolerance rules disproportionately punished young workers of color for acts of empathy, discretion, or basic human kindness. Crockett didn't tweet about the meetings. She didn't schedule press conferences. She scheduled strategy sessions. Within weeks, the first draft of a bill was circulating among allies. A proposal for fair employment protections for youth workers, particularly those under 21, focusing on grace-based review systems, required warnings before termination, and conflict de-escalation training for frontline managers. It wasn't flashy, it didn't promise revolution, but it was the beginning of one. In interviews, when asked if she was proud of how she handled the viral moment, she would pause, then answer, "I'm not here to handle moments. I'm here to fix systems." Some people didn't understand what she meant. That was fine. The ones who needed to understand were already listening, not to what she said in front of cameras, but to what she was building in the quiet. And in that quiet, real change had begun. It took 8 days for McDonald's corporate to speak. Not a tweet, not a press conference. Just a 3-paragraph press release posted quietly on their website and emailed to a few media outlets under the subject line, "Statement regarding recent incident at franchise location." The language was precise, polished, and utterly empty. Words like reevaluating internal policy and committed to fostering a fair workplace floated like steam from a cold cup of coffee. No names, no apologies, just distance wrapped in legal padding. The public wasn't impressed. By the time the statement hit inboxes, the video of Jasmine Crockett standing in that McDonald's lobby had surpassed 2 million views. Comment sections were on fire. People didn't want corporate language. They wanted accountability. And when they didn't get it, they did what the internet does best. They dug deeper. Anonymous employees from other McDonald's locations began posting screenshots, schedules with sudden shift removals, texts from managers demanding explanations for unauthorized kindness, even group chats where assistant managers joked about write-ups like they were trading cards. One former worker posted, "I got fired for giving my cousin a cup of water. He wasn't even eating, just waiting for me to get off." That's the kind of policy we're talking about. It wasn't just McDonald's anymore. Workers from other chains chimed in, retail, gas stations, grocery stores. The pattern was unmistakable. Compassion was only acceptable if it didn't interrupt the transaction. If it slowed down the system, it became a liability. And now, for the first time in a long time, people weren't just complaining. They were connecting, organizing. The hashtag #, more than minimum began trending. By the weekend, a boycott movement had gained traction. People posted videos canceling orders at the speaker. "Until you fix your policy, you don't get my dollars." Still, Crockett said nothing about the boycott. When asked by a reporter whether she supported it, she replied simply, "I support the people doing what their conscience calls them to do. But I'm not here to spark drama. I'm here to restore dignity." Her restraint was deliberate. She didn't want the story to become about noise. She wanted it to stay about the message. And that message she repeated in every meeting, every draft memo, and every quiet hallway conversation was simple. A system that punishes humanity for not acting like a machine is a system built to fail. The headlines could do what they wanted. She would keep her eyes on the policies, the protections, the long game. The corporation had finally spoken, but the people had already decided they were done listening to statements. They were watching for change. It was a slow Wednesday afternoon at the employment center. Keon was sitting in the corner room, flipping through an interview prep packet for the third time, trying to memorize questions he already knew he wouldn't answer the same way twice. Regina walked in quietly, a curious look on her face. "You've got a visitor," she said. "Not from the media. Don't worry, but you might want to come out front." Standing in the small, sunlit lobby was an older man in a slate gray suit, soft at the edges, the kind that had once been expensive but now lived in quiet retirement. His hair was silver, his beard neatly trimmed, and under one arm he held a worn leather portfolio. His eyes met Keon's not with scrutiny, but a kind of quiet familiarity, like he had already been walking through this moment in his mind before it happened. "Keon Whitlow?" he asked. Keon nodded, unsure. "Yes, sir." The man offered his hand. "Arthur Beeman. I used to be regional vice president for McDonald's. Retired 4 years ago." Keon blinked, unsure what to say. Arthur didn't wait for a response. He gently gestured toward a pair of chairs near the window. "Mind if I sit for a moment?" They sat, the center's usual murmur falling into the background. Arthur didn't come with an apology, and Keon didn't expect one. What he came with was something far less performative and far more personal. "I spent 37 years in that company," Arthur began, his voice calm, worn by time but still steady. "I helped write some of those policies you've seen thrown around online this week. I believed in them. Still do, in a sense. But I forgot something along the way." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a handwritten envelope, sealed with a thin line of tape. "You reminded me." Keon took the envelope with hesitant fingers. Inside was a folded note, written in blue ink with a hand that had once been firm but now trembled slightly. It read, "Sometimes it takes one honest act to wake up a world that forgot its soul. Thank you for reminding us what matters." Along with it, a check for $500. "Not charity," Arthur said before Keon could protest. "Just, acknowledgement and gratitude." Keon swallowed hard. "I don't know if I deserve this." Arthur shook his head, eyes kind but firm. "It's not about what you deserve. It's about what you sparked." He stood, gave Keon's shoulder a gentle pat, and turned to leave. "Keep walking forward, son. You've already done more than most of us ever dared to." And just like that, the door opened and closed with barely a sound. But in that stillness, Keon realized something rare had just occurred. Not redemption from a system, but recognition from someone who once helped build it. It didn't happen overnight, but something in Keon began to shift. Day by day, task by task, he started to find his rhythm at the community tech office. Filing paperwork turned into troubleshooting basic systems. Greeting clients evolved into leading small walkthroughs for new visitors. He arrived early, stayed late when needed, took notes like they were currency, and asked questions that made supervisors raise their eyebrows in the best way. What he lacked in polish, he more than made up for in presence. He didn't try to impress. He tried to be useful, and people noticed. Regina, the coordinator who once handed him a borrowed shirt, now pointed him out to new interns. "That's the kind of worker you want to be." Marvin, the hiring manager who took a chance, told the team, "Keon doesn't just show up, he shows through." And Keon, for the first time in years, didn't feel like he was being graded for existing. He felt capable. But with quiet success came louder attention. Reporters began calling the center. Emails came in with subject lines like "National Morning Show Feature" and "Profile Opportunity from Friar to Future." A documentary filmmaker even left a voicemail. "We'd love to tell your story with the care it deserves." Keon didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to shrink back into the routine he was only just learning to trust. Another part wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was time to say something, not for himself, but for the people still stuck in silence. He called Jasmine Crockett. She picked up on the third ring. He didn't have to say much. She already knew. "They want the story," he said. "They want me to be the story." There was a pause on the line. Then her voice, steady and unmistakable. "Don't speak to prove anything. Speak to build something. Say it when it plants something new, not when it just feeds the fire. Speak when it builds, not when it burns. That night, Keon opened his laptop, hands hovering over the keys for what felt like forever. Then he started typing. Not a speech, not a viral manifesto, just a simple, honest op-ed. He talked about what it meant to get fired for being kind, about walking home in silence, about being seen, not saved, and about how one woman didn't offer him a second chance. She offered him a path forward. When it was published, the responses weren't explosive. They were quiet, thoughtful. A teacher emailed to say she read it aloud in class. A warehouse worker shared it with his union representative. One comment simply read, "You put into words what I lived but couldn't explain." Keon didn't go viral, but he went visible, and this time he was ready to carry the weight of that light. The folding chairs filled up faster than expected. By the time Keon arrived, quiet, clean-cut, and trying his best to blend in, there were barely a handful of seats left along the side walls. The room buzzed with quiet conversations, the kind full of waiting hearts and cautious hope. It wasn't the usual crowd for a community forum. There were teenagers in oversized hoodies sitting beside elderly women in pressed church hats. There were teachers, day laborers, single moms with squirming toddlers. Every face in the room had a reason to be there. Every story was a wrinkle in the same worn-out page of justice denied. Keon kept his head low, unsure of how many people recognized him, not from the viral video, but from the story that grew beyond it. He hadn't been invited to speak. He didn't want to. He was just there to witness. Regina waved him in from the registration table, whispering, "You'll want to stay for this." And so he did, leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes forward. Then the room settled. The murmurs faded. The lights dimmed just enough to draw the crowd's attention to the small wooden stage at the front of the rec center. Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the mic, not in a power suit, but in a simple blouse and jeans. No podium, no teleprompter, just her voice, steady and full. She didn't start with Keon. She started with the numbers, with the policies, with the hundreds of youth terminations filed each month across service industries for non-malicious infractions, late clock-ins, helping customers without clearance, bending rules to be human. She read from handwritten testimonies submitted before the event. A 16-year-old who lost her job for letting a hungry kid eat leftover pastries. A 19-year-old fired after covering a colleague's shift without manager approval. Then she paused, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the mic stand. "We tell our kids to do the right thing," she said, "to be kind, to be decent. But what happens when kindness gets them fired? What happens when compassion is met with discipline instead of dignity?" She let the silence hang for a beat, then continued. "That's why today I'm announcing the Youth Employment Justice Initiative, a legislative and community-driven effort to protect our youngest workers, to ensure they are not punished for doing what we taught them to do, to care." There were no fireworks, just breath caught in chests. And then the applause began, not polite, not choreographed, but raw and rising. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. A man in the corner clapped until his palms turned red. Keon stood frozen, heart pounding. Not because it was about him, but because in that moment he realized it never really had been. As Jasmine said it best, "This isn't about one boy, it's about all of us." After the town hall ended, no one rushed to leave. People lingered, hovering in small groups like the room itself didn't want to let go of the weight it had just held. Keon stayed by the wall at first, watching from a distance as strangers embraced, exchanged stories, and wiped tears they hadn't expected to shed. He wasn't used to spaces like this, where vulnerability wasn't a weakness but a bridge, where telling the truth didn't invite shame, but solidarity. A girl no older than 17 approached him, voice shaking. "You're Keon, right? From the story." He nodded slowly. She didn't try to take a picture or ask for a quote. She just said, "They fired me for giving my friend a free drink on her birthday. I thought I was doing something nice." Keon didn't offer advice. He just said, "Me too." And in that moment, it was enough. Soon, more joined the circle. A boy who'd been let go from a movie theater for giving a family an extra popcorn because the dad said he'd skipped dinner to afford the tickets. A girl who got a warning for offering her jacket to a shivering customer waiting outside. They laughed at the absurdity of it all. Then someone cried, and no one told them to stop. What began as a sharing of wounds slowly became the drafting of purpose. One of the volunteers from the employment center passed around a clipboard. Notes turned to action plans. Let's start compiling the most common violations we've seen, someone suggested. We can create a toolkit, something new workers can actually use. Another chimed in, what if we push for worker orientation that includes humanity, not just handbooks? Former employees from larger companies joined in too, some quietly, some with fiery urgency. A retired HR rep offered to help translate legal jargon into real-world language. A labor organizer who'd followed Crockett's work from the sidelines stepped forward and said, This is how movements begin, not with noise, with truth. Keon listened more than he spoke, but every now and then, someone would look his way and smile, not in admiration, but in recognition. They knew what it was like to be punished for caring, to be told that following your heart was insubordination, and now together they were reclaiming that narrative. For the first time since his quiet act of kindness had cost him a job, Keon no longer felt like a headline. He felt like part of something unfolding, bigger, deeper, real. And as the lights flickered above and the room slowly emptied, it became clear. The truth once shared didn't just bring justice, it brought light. The room had thinned out, but not emptied. Folding chairs sat askew, water bottles half drunk on windowsills, and a few children played near the coat rack with paper signs they'd drawn themselves. Kindness is not a crime. Keon had no plans to speak. That had never been part of the plan. He was content to observe, to absorb, to stay in the quiet where he felt most safe. But as the final moments of the gathering approached, someone from the volunteer staff walked up to him and gently asked, "Would you like to say something? No pressure, just the mic's open." He hesitated. His hands were already sweating. His mind spun in every direction, writing a dozen speeches and deleting them all in the space of 10 seconds. But then he looked up and saw the faces still in the room. People who had shared their pain with him, who had seen him not as a symbol, but as a person. And just behind the crowd, leaning against the wall near the exit, stood Jasmine Crockett. She didn't nod, didn't gesture. She just looked at him with that calm, steady gaze, the kind that didn't push, but gave permission. Keon stood, walked slowly toward the mic. Every step felt like it echoed louder than the last. He adjusted it awkwardly, cleared his throat once, then twice. Hi, he began, voice a little too soft for the first word. My name's Keon. Most of you know that already. A quiet ripple of chuckles helped him breathe. I didn't come here to talk. I came to listen, because for a while now, I felt like I didn't really have anything to say that mattered. I got fired for being nice. That's the part everyone remembers. But what you don't know is that I almost let that moment tell me who I was. Like, that was the end of my story. He paused, gripping the mic a little tighter. But then someone showed up, not to fix it, not to rescue me, just to say, you still matter. And now, hearing all of you, knowing how many of us have gone through the same kind of thing, I realize I didn't ask for this, but maybe I can do something with it. No applause followed immediately, just silence, not the kind that waits to be filled, but the kind that holds what was just said like something fragile and sacred. Then slowly the room responded, with nods, with tears, with a kind of quiet acknowledgement that said thank you louder than any cheer. At the back of the room, Crockett didn't move, but her smile said everything. Proud, protective, patient. She wasn't watching a boy speak. She was watching a voice find itself. And in that moment, the future felt just a little more possible. It had been almost 2 months since he last stood under the golden arches of that particular McDonald's. Time, in its strange way, had both blurred and sharpened everything. The walk felt shorter now, though the sidewalk cracks were the same. The flickering sign above the building still skipped every third pulse, like it hadn't quite caught up to the present. But Keon wasn't here to relive anything. He wasn't here to confront anyone or reclaim anything lost. He just wanted to remember. The parking lot was half full, Afternoon sunlight spilled across the windshield of a dusty blue sedan as a father passed a happy meal to a toddler in the back seat. The world kept moving, exactly as it always had. Keon paused before the entrance, took a breath that felt strangely clean, then pushed open the door. Inside, everything looked the same, but it felt smaller. Not physically, just smaller. The counters weren't as tall as he remembered. The fryer's hiss wasn't as intimidating. Even the scent of fries and floor cleaner had lost some of its power. Familiarity had shrunk the place down to scale, or maybe growth had expanded him beyond it. The faces were different. New kids behind the register, moving with the same distracted rhythm he once knew by heart. None of them recognized him. No one flinched when he stepped toward the counter. There was no manager peering from behind a half-closed office door. No history thick in the air. Just strangers doing a job. Keon didn't order anything. He just stood for a moment near the front, absorbing it all. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Nothing fancy, just a note. He laid it gently on the counter near the napkin dispenser, where someone might find it or toss it without reading. Either was fine. The note said, "Thank you for teaching me what matters." K? He didn't wait for someone to read it. Didn't look back to see if anyone noticed. He simply walked out the way he came, the bell above the door giving a soft chime behind him. There was no applause, no cameras. Just a quiet boy in a clean shirt, walking down a familiar street with his shoulders a little higher, his steps a little steadier. The place hadn't changed, but he had. And that, he realized, was more than enough. It arrived on a Tuesday, folded between two pieces of junk mail and a coupon flyer for window tinting. No return address, just a Detroit postmark and Keon's name written in looping, slightly shaky cursive. He almost tossed it aside. He wasn't expecting anything. But something about the envelope made him pause. He turned it over slowly, then carefully slid his finger under the flap, unfolding the single sheet of lined paper inside. The handwriting was neat but worn, like it had been written in a quiet room late at night. Maybe after the dishes were done and the kids were asleep. It read, "Dear Keon, you don't know me, and I don't expect you to. My name is Laverne Adams. I'm a single mother living in Detroit. I saw your op-ed last week, shared through a friend's Facebook post. I read it 3 times. Then I printed it out and handed it to my son, Malik. He's 16, works at a small market after school. He's smart, gentle, and too quiet for his own good. Last month, his supervisor made him work through 2 breaks and shorted his pay by almost $20. Malik didn't say a word, just swallowed it and kept going. But after reading what you wrote about standing up, about not letting one moment define you, he came to me and said, 'Mom, I think I want to talk to someone about what happened.' That's all. He didn't storm in. He didn't yell. But he found his voice, and I believe he found it because you found yours. So I want to say thank you, not just for what you did, but for what you gave others permission to do. You changed more than your life. You gave others permission to rise. With love and respect, Laverne Adams." Keon read it twice, then a third time, slower. He stared at the signature for a long moment, then folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. There was something about seeing his name in someone else's handwriting, a stranger's, attached to a story he had never lived, but now somehow belonged to. It made everything heavier and more real. It wasn't just his journey anymore. It wasn't just his lesson or his fight. Somewhere in Detroit, a boy had found the courage to speak, because Keon had dared to act. One small decision, one meal, one moment. And now, quietly, powerfully, it was echoing in places he'd never been, in voices he'd never hear, but would forever be part of. The chamber was quiet, as it often was when the clock ticked past 6 p.m., and the bulk of the press had packed up for the day. Only a handful of senators remained in their seats, their expressions weary after hours of debate. But when Jasmine Crockett stood, dressed in midnight blue and not a hint of hesitation in her voice, the room leaned in. She didn't raise her voice. She never had to. The weight of her words did the work for her. "Mr. President, my colleagues," she began, "we speak often in this chamber of laws, of budgets, of structure. But today I want to remind us of something far less quantifiable, but no less critical: dignity, and where it begins. She paused, letting silence do what applause rarely could. Several years ago, a teenager in Dallas paid for a congresswoman's meal. $4. That's all. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because he was raised to show respect. He was fired for that act. Her voice didn't waver. Fired. For kindness. The room stayed hushed, save for the faint scratch of pens noting her words. That boy, she continued, did not storm into the spotlight. He walked into it by accident, then stood in it with grace. He found his footing not because anyone gave him a platform, but because he refused to sit down when the world tried to make him small. She took a breath. That boy, Keon Whitlow, didn't just find his voice. He gave others the courage to find theirs. From Detroit to El Paso, from strip mall break rooms to back office corridors, workers began to question rules that punish the human instinct to care. Crockett glanced around the chamber, her gaze not confrontational but insistent. We often talk about systemic change like it must begin with legislation. But let's be clear, systems shift when people do, and that shift often begins in the smallest moments. A sandwich, a decision, a silence broken. She stepped back from the podium, slightly eyes steady. Doing the right thing might not bring comfort. It might not come with rewards, but it never dies quietly. It lives, sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly, in the people brave enough to act when no one's watching. As she yielded the floor, there was no standing ovation. But something deeper passed through the chamber. A stillness, a reckoning. Outside the chamber, the sky was turning gold. And somewhere out there, a young man named Keon Whitlow was still walking forward. Not for applause, but because he knew now what it meant to blaze. And so the story of a teenage boy and a woman in blue fades from headlines, but not from memory. Because this was never just about a sandwich. It was never just about a job, or a tweet, or even a bill debated behind polished doors. This was about what happens when the smallest act of dignity collides with a system that has forgotten how to recognize it. About how courage is often quiet, and justice, when it finally arrives, does so not with fanfare, but with footsteps. We live in a world built on rules. Some are necessary, others are inherited without question, passed down like rusted tools we never stop to sharpen. But every now and then, someone chooses to break the silence instead of the rule book. Not to rebel, but to remind us of something we've allowed to go dim: our shared humanity. Keon's story is not unique, and that's exactly why it matters. Because it belongs to the barista who covers $1 for a single mother, to the cashier who offers a coat to a shivering child, to anyone who ever chose compassion over compliance and paid a price for it. Though the events in this narrative are drawn from real-life accounts, the reflections expressed here are guided by interpretation, not by legal verdicts or institutional endorsement. This is not a reenactment. It is a reminder that every act of grace, however fleeting, echoes louder than we think, and that telling these stories is not about blaming systems, but about challenging them to do better. So if you remember nothing else, remember this: doing the right thing might not bring comfort, but it never dies quietly. It lives in you, waiting for the moment you choose to act. Thank you for staying till the end. Your time, your heart, your presence matters more than you know. If this story spoke to you, speak back. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let's keep this conversation and this fight alive.